Tonight, I'll fulfill my wildest dream and imagine what would life be like if we libertarians were in charge. Everyone would be happy and prosperous. Government would be small. We'd have low taxes and freedom. And if authoritarians intruded on our freedom, we'd have floating cities at sea, where people could be free from the busybody.
Stossel! Wake up!
Oh, I was dreaming. This isn't a libertarian world. This comedian understands that.
You're not free! You're not free in the least! You need a diploma in this country to cut hair!
And central planners can seize your property.
Everyone's house is in danger. If the developer wants your home, it's his for the taking.
A libertarian world would be great, but people don't get that. Some say it would be anarchy, like much of Somalia. But they're wrong. They don't understand. If libertarians were in charge, life would be much better. And that's our show tonight.
And now, John Stossel.
What would America look like if libertarians were in charge? Would it be all happiness and sunshine like this? Or would it be anarchy, as opponents of libertarianism often claim? Drug users will get high and crash into your car. Rich people will steal from the poor. Sex will be all over TV. Oh, that's happened already. But many people say if you libertarians succeed, there'll be anarchy. America would be like Somalia. That's what they say. I say we'd have much more happiness and sunshine. And so do my guests, David Thoreau of the Independent Institute, a libertarian think tank in Oakland, California, and Herb London, who runs the Hudson Institute in Washington, D.C. So, Herb, I don't think of you, I think of the Hudson Institute, a bunch of conservatives, not libertarians.
Well, there are some of us who I think are very libertarian on domestic policy issues, very much concerned about the extent of government intrusion in our lives,
All right,
very much concerned about the growth that we've seen.
So let me raise that basic issue. We'd have anarchy without the government we have now.
I think it's kind of silly. I don't think we would have anarchy. After all, there's normative behavior in the United States. If the government disappeared tomorrow, we would create many forms of political activity.
People would suffer. There'd be unsafe workplaces, child labor, chaos.
I don't think that that would be the case. My own feeling is that what you would see is a form of what Madison talked about in Federalist Paper 10. Factions would emerge. They would neutralize one another. There would be institutions that would emerge from the people themselves. If, after all, you would...
Other institutions not top-down from government.
Exactly. Organizations that would be created from the bottom up. Organizations that people would like to see in place.
So, David, how does that address this fear of anarchy? People think without the big government we have now, it wouldn't be nice for the little people.
A free society is not a free-for-all. It's a society of law, it's a society of rulemaking, and the rulemaking is done by property owners on the peaceful use of their property in conjunction with other people.
Before we had the big government welfare programs, all over America there were these mutual aid societies.
That's right. There are about 10,000 of them, and the most successful mutual aid societies were started by people who are the most discriminated against in society. New immigrants, Jewish people, African Americans. These are the most successful groups because they pooled their resources, they cared about each other, they were able to then tap into it when they really needed it, not just on a whim, for health insurance and disability and many other kinds of things, far better than the welfare state.
Because they know who needed real help and who needed a push.
That's right, and they had information to measure what would be appropriate.
Herb, what about this idea that without government, that it's the poor who would suffer most?
I don't buy that. There are lots of grassroots organizations, as David has pointed out, charitable organizations that existed long before government decided to play this role of taking care of the poor.
But they miss some people. Some people fall through the cracks.
Look, there are always people that fall through the cracks. I'm not saying that a system is perfect. There is no perfect system. But at the same time, we're talking about what would be desirable from the standpoint of creating both liberty as well as security.
And I just want to clarify something. I titled this show, What If Libertarians Were in Charge? It's important to be clear when we say that, what we mean to be in charge of. Because I hate it when, before elections, the political commentators say this.
His job is to run the country.
You can run the country and campaign at the same time.
Helping the president make the decisions to run the country and run the world.
And you hired this guy to run the country.
I wish they'd stop saying that. No one person runs the country. Millions of free people run America. The president presides over the government, actually just one branch of the government, also commander-in-chief, but of the Army and Navy, not of you, unless you're in the military. He is the most important person in government, but he doesn't run the country, and I wish those people would stop saying that. Why do you think they so often do?
Well, I think the reason why is because if you go to Hollywood today, there is a monomyth in Hollywood. There is always the one person that can solve the problem. If you remember the Westerns, for example, like Shane, he appears from nowhere, deals with a problem that the local people cannot deal with. It is a kind of mythology that deals with the idea that there's a Superman, some individual who's capable of solving the problem.
Dave, where
that's right.
Accountant
like
comes in and balances the budget.
Exactly, exactly. But frankly, it's always the people in the community that solve the problem. It's never the Superman, except for Hollywood.
So in your ideal world, how big would government be? It's now about, the feds are about 30% of the economy. You add state and local, you get above 40%. How big should it be?
Well, I'd say something on the order of 20% would be more than enough. I mean, it was a kind of standard that Milton Friedman used to talk about, and I think it's really quite appropriate. And I think it's appropriate to consider it in the present context, where we're moving to the 35% level in the United States, which I think is far too high.
I would say it should be far less than that. And I would say that
5%.
What you want is institutions that are going to be effective in protecting people's property rights.
And then what? We're richer? We're happier? How are we better off?
I think that we're richer, we're more free, and at the same time, I think that we're more prosperous in the sense that we have greater opportunities to create things on our own.
So you say, but when I say this, the lovers of big government portray libertarianism very badly. 1/3 of a million people have watched this on YouTube.
Boy, this is nice.
It's the nicest public beach I've ever been on.
Public? You mean this is taxpayer funded?
Don't let another vacation be ruined by
socialism.
Ready to take your vacation back from big government? Come to Somalia, libertarian paradise.
All right, that's the perception. The chaos and anarchy and murder of Somalia is a libertarian paradise.
Mm-hmm. Look, there are boundaries in a society, including a libertarian society. It is bounded by laws. When Jefferson talked about the pursuit of happiness, he wasn't saying happiness in any sort of way that you want. He was saying it's constrained by virtue. There is normative behavior that clearly plays a role in these matters. Laws, normative behavior, customs, traditions all play a part. If you don't have law, and you don't have customs, and you don't have traditions, you can indeed have anarchy. But I'm suggesting that in a society that has the kind of traditions that we do, anarchy would not be the result.
Let's just play the rest of the Somalia video.
You'll fly into fully deregulated Baladogli Airport and find a free market haven where the police, roads, and Navy are maintained by rational self-interest and libertarian magic dust.
The market's at work.
I have cholera.
What?
Come to Somalia. Because government isn't the solution to our problems, government is the problem, and now you have cholera.
This is the attitude of many libertarian opponents. There's this hatred. You want people to have cholera.
Well, what was the outcome of the interventions of the U.S. government in Somalia? It was essentially to create a situation of anarchy, of lawlessness. So it's a great example of the failure of government to impose rules on people trying to do what Herb was saying. They're trying to draw on their traditions, the mores, to establish essentially a rule of law standard to protect property. And it's been a disaster.
Are there any countries that are close to a libertarian world?
Well, there was a time when I think New Zealand had this notion that it was going to engage in free market economics and move toward a somewhat libertarian stance. It didn't work in large part because the politics of that country didn't allow it to work. And of course, one of the things that you find is when anyone falls into the interstices, there's always a politician who will say, you see, this didn't work. This kind of libertarianism doesn't work. And I think
government has to step in and fix it.
Yeah, government has to step in to fix it. And of course, you saw this during the last campaign. I'll never forget this woman who stood up during the course of the campaign and said, I am so pleased that we finally have a candidate that's going to help me with my mortgage, with my car payments, with the education of my children. And of course, we do not or should not live in the nanny state. This is precisely the problem that we are now facing.
It's intuitive, and it's from thousands of years of evolution that mommy and daddy raised you. You turn to them, they're going to fix it, and then the head of the village, the tribal leader, will do it. But that doesn't work in a country of 300 million people.
Very often elites in the society do tend to believe that you need a concentration of authority. They do tend to believe that there's one person or a group of people that can make the decisions for the larger society. This is what I would describe as the Soros phenomenon, where in fact you have an individual who believes that he plays the great role of the person who is the manipulator, the great ventriloquist in the sky. And I think that it is a very dangerous phenomenon, but of course it's one that we live with.
There are a few countries that have done pretty well. Hong Kong,
yes,
as limited government, has thrived. But the people there don't get it. Chile has done well. They embraced free markets, and their social security system is solvent since they privatized it, unlike ours. They're 3 times wealthier than 30 years ago. That's a graph of per capita income in Chile. Schools there were semi-privatized, so kids could take a voucher to most any school. And now they outscore every other South American country on international tests. And yet, because of that inequality that comes with freedom and free markets and capitalism, they in Chile are now having riots. Students are upset that some richer people use the vouchers for private schools, and those private schools were superior. So now the protesters are rioting because they want all private education abolished. So we're working against human nature here.
Well, you're working against a Marxist notion, the idea of the redistribution of wealth.
It's appealing.
Well, of course it's appealing. It's appealing in the sense that we want equality. But of course there is the difference between equality and individualism. If you have a society that puts an emphasis on individualism, it's very obvious that the outcome cannot be equality. There's going to be
big differences.
Well, there may be big differences that exist in the society, but at the same time, it's a question of the ventilation in those differences. Does it allow the person who's at the bottom to move to the top? Does it allow the person who's at the top to move to the bottom? That really is the issue.
And the Libertarian Society does. Thank you, Herb London and David Thoreau. Thank you for fighting for freedom. Coming up as we contemplate the idyllic libertarian world, what would happen if we get rid of all energy subsidies, natural gas, ethanol, oil, all of it?